But first, breaking news, R. Kelly guilty on all counts. Now the singer faces life in prison.
Let's get right to CBS 2 political investigator Dana Kozlov live in the newsroom. Dana, a quick decision in his sex crimes trial.
Yeah, Erica and Brad, this afternoon's guilty verdict ends an ugly chapter in the singer's life. After years of whispers and accusations about R. Kelly, a jury set the record straight, convicting him on 9 counts in an explosive sex trafficking trial. R. Kelly remained motionless with his eyes down as he listened to the verdict read in a New York courtroom. Several women, underaged at the time, accused Kelly of using them for perverse and sadistic whims. Those allegations included taking some across state lines for sex acts. In the end, the jury bought it, convicting Kelly on all 9 counts. You can see some of them on the screen there, including such things as coercion and enticement. 8 of them stem from something called the Mann Act, which refers to a federal law that prohibits sex trafficking, named after an Illinois congressman, enacted more than a century ago. An attorney representing some of the victims praised the jury's verdict and blasted Kelly.
I have been practicing law for 47 years. During this time, I have pursued many sexual predators who have committed crimes against women and children. Of all the predators that I have pursued, however, Mr. Kelly is the worst.
R. Kelly, known for such hits as I Believe I Can Fly, now faces the real prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars. His attorney called the verdict disappointing, adding Kelly wasn't expecting it and they plan to appeal. He's also facing a case here in Chicago, and we don't know yet if prosecutors here will move forward with that case. Live in the newsroom, Dana Kozlov, CBS 2 News.
CBC's senior entertainment reporter Eli Glasner joins us now. So Eli, walk us through this verdict.
Well, guilty all 9 counts of racketeering and sex trafficking charges. They used the Mann Act against R. Kelly. That is the same legal proceeding they used against Weinstein, and able to show how it wasn't just R. Kelly, but the people around him, security personnel, and basically saying that this was a conspiracy to try and keep witnesses and accusers silent. And the racketeering charge is very significant because that comes with it a penalty of up to 20 years sentence, depending on, of course, we don't know the sentence at this point. But though it seems like the jury deliberated, asked for some details, actually listened to some very disturbing recordings, but given the complexity and the list of charges, came back with a very confident verdict against R. Kelly. No mistaking how they felt given what they've been listening to over 5 weeks now.
And of course, this has been a story unfolding in the media spotlight for years. Can you remind us of how we got here?
I mean, at one point, R. Kelly was an R&B superstar. He was one of the leading voices of his generation. If you talked about R&B, you talked about the kind of sultry style that he had. I mean, how many people got married to some of his songs like I Believe I Can Fly? And of course, that celebrity almost became armor that when these charges and women began speaking out, it took some time for them to be heard, for them to be believed. There have been documentaries talking about the women who spoke out about what R. Kelly did to them. There was a child pornography course in 2002 where ultimately he was found not guilty. They couldn't prove that the girl on that tape was the minor. But I think this case, which began with the charges in 2019, really was the turning point, with numerous women who were willing to speak, with 34 witnesses, I believe, and really giving much more detail in terms of what happened. 9 women and 2 men accusing the singer of very disturbing behavior. If you listen to what the prosecutors said in their final statements to the jury, saying it is time to hold the defendant responsible for the pain he inflicted on each of his women, listing the women's name. We heard about tapes played for the jury. We heard about witnesses describing the violent temper that Kelly had, the harsh physical abuse. And he would use his celebrity, it seems, what we heard from accusations and the witnesses, as kind of a cudgel, but also a reward, offering people fame, offering people the opportunity to, maybe have a career of their own, but also threatening them into silence. And so he created this system of control that made it incredibly difficult for his accusers to speak out. And it's taken some time, and I think you can credit the Me Too movement in some part that now you have women that were willing to step forward and speak. And this was still with many fans rallying around R. Kelly, so much so that there had to be a mute R. Kelly movement, that there were people saying this is disturbing. We believe the women, trying to stop his music being played, trying to kind of pierce that armor of celebrity. And, it's interesting, the defense for R. Kelly basically kind of called this a conspiracy, as we heard, actually invoked Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., described the witnessers as stalkers, as hustlers and groupies, and said, forget all that fluff, forget what happened to Aaliyah and so much else. But certainly the jury has come back with their decision this afternoon, and that could lead to a very serious sentence for Kelly.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. In terms of what you'll be looking for going forward, it obviously will be the sentence.
It's the sentence, but there are still two sex-related charges in Illinois and Minnesota, and those will be very serious cases themselves. So, much like Harvey Weinstein, some disturbing parallels. We're found guilty, but other cases moving forward, and it appears there still will be other trials that R. Kelly will have to stand for.
Eli, thank you. That is the CBC's senior entertainment reporter, Eli Glasner, in Toronto.
News: R. Kelly, now a felon. Good evening, everyone, at 5 o'clock. I'm Bill Ritter.
And I'm Sade Better-Moi. After decades of suspicion and allegations, a jury finding the singer guilty of racketeering and sex trafficking.
That verdict coming at the end of a 6-week trial. Eyewitness News reporter NJ Burkett live at the federal courthouse in Brooklyn with the breaking news. NJ.
That's it, Bill. R&B superstar R. Kelly, once a national, global celebrity, convicted on every count in the indictment: racketeering and sex trafficking. He was found guilty on the first full day of deliberations. It was a quick verdict, which is always a bad sign for the defense. For the government and the victims, vindication for allegations that go back decades.
Today's guilty verdict forever brands R. Kelly as a predator who used his fame and fortune to prey on the young, the vulnerable, and the voiceless for his own sexual gratification.
Kelly was found guilty of all 9 counts in the indictment: racketeering and sex trafficking, specifically arranging sexual encounters with underage victims across state lines.
The jury delivered a powerful message to men like R. Kelly. No matter how long it takes, the long arm of the law will catch up with you.
I believe I can fly. R. Kelly's career took flight in the 1990s, only to crash and burn in the years that followed. Prosecutors said the Grammy-winning R&B superstar used his fame and fortune to exploit the victims for his own sexual gratification, allegedly luring them into his world and keeping them there through fear and intimidation. Prosecutors claimed Kelly married the late Brooklyn-born R&B singer Aaliyah when she was 15, after providing her with a fake ID. Kelly did not testify in his own defense, instead allowing his lawyers to portray him as the victim of groupies, stalkers, and gold diggers. His attorneys accused the government of a rush to judgment and accused the media of running wild. They promised to appeal.
Of course, Mr. Kelly is disappointed. He was not anticipating this verdict because, based on the evidence, why should he anticipate this verdict?
Attorney Gloria Allred represented 3 of the victims.
I have been practicing law for 47 years. During this time, I have pursued many sexual predators who have committed crimes against women and children. Of all the predators that I have pursued, however, Mr. Kelly is the worst.
Well, Kelly was found to be a flight risk and has been ordered held without bail since 2019. He is 54 years old and could face up to life in prison at his sentencing, which is scheduled for May of next year. We're live at U.S. District Court.
We have confirmed as well that count of racketeering, he is guilty here. So it is, again, not entirely unexpected, Ron, based on what you have said. Please go ahead.
Right. There are 9 counts altogether. Racketeering is the big one. Then there are 8 others. And of those 8 other counts, some of them were subsumed under the charge of racketeering. So it's likely that he may be found guilty of some of those other sex trafficking charges. They're broken down primarily as they pertain to the cases of the individual accusers. So that's what we're looking at. It may take some time for the jury to read out the rest of its verdict. But the racketeering one is the big one. This was a very creative charge that the prosecution came up with, again, to put all these alleged misdeeds under, again, dating back to the 1990s to almost to the present day, involving many, many women who were brought to R. Kelly's home, to his music studio, imprisoned in one case, drugged, sexually assaulted, and again, just horrific stories of what these women were telling. The prosecution in its closing argument made a point for the jury to she said, these women's lives should matter. See them for who they are. They were women from humble beginnings, for the most part, women of color, which is different than what we've seen in most of these Me Too cases, and which is one reason why there was some question about whether they would be believed. However, the jury has returned this verdict of guilty, so they were believed, and they told really horrific stories. The prosecution asked the jury to see them as young women. So many of them were 16, 17 at the time when this all happened. And so many of them were aspiring music stars who saw R. Kelly as just this idolic figure that they thought that this was their big break, their turning point. So they were willing to do almost anything for his favor and to follow him. And they thought that this was going to be their dream that for so many of them, as the prosecutors put it, just turned into an absolute nightmare. It's really hard to read through the descriptions. It was difficult to sit there and listen to what these women were saying. But they did, and the jury believed them, and now we have this. The racketeering charge, again, carries 20 years. There are 8 other counts that carry 10 and 20 years for the most part each. It all adds up to the rest of his life in prison. And then, as you were pointing out earlier, yes, there's another federal case in Illinois that has to do with child pornography charges, obstruction charges, sex trafficking charges. There's also state-level cases in Cook County, Chicago, Illinois, and one in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, I believe it is. That's another state charge. They all have to do with sexual misconduct, alleged misconduct with young women, underage girls. So R. Kelly, he has been in custody for the last 2 years. He was arrested in 2019, and he has been held. He was denied bail. This trial was supposed to happen a year ago. It was delayed by COVID. But through all that, despite his pleas, he has been held in prison, and he will remain in prison. And based on this, he is apparently never going to get out of prison for the rest of his life.